In this first segment, I'd like to discuss vibrato. Intonation is one of your primary goals on the instrument. You want to make sure that you play in tune as much as possible, and that's just an ongoing battle because the instrument has its deficiencies. But for what we're talking about, vibrato is something we do where we bend the string purposely out of tune. The reason we do it is to emulate the human voice. And in all your blues playing, make sure you're trying to express a vocal type approach through your instrument. Now when I use the term dry, that means playing it with no vibrato, just dead on. So if you've tuned your instrument up and you chose an A note and you're playing over an A7 chord, it should sound in tune. Now I would suggest that you get a multi-track recorder or even just a cassette recorder if it doesn't have too much wow and flutter, and play the chord that you're going to play over. So here we have an A7 chord. Our appropriate scale for blues would be the 6th-string root, A minor pentatonic scale, and the root would be the strongest tone we could hit. Play it dry and make sure it's in tune. Now there are a few factors about just playing a note dry on the instrument that could mess you up. If you have big frets, don't squeeze too hard because you're actually bending the string down between the frets. There are 3 areas where you can go out of tune. Squeezing too hard, directly perpendicular to the fingerboard. Pulling to the left, where you're doing a little tug-of-war and pulling the string away from the bridge. That would make you go sharp. And pushing toward your right, that's basically the same thing, just going the wrong way. And also bending it along the fret axis. So you have these different axes that you have to make sure that you stay in tune with. But when we do vibrato, on purpose, I said, we go sharp and then we come back flat to the natural note. Now, I call this a relaxed string vibrato. We'll get into bent string vibrato a little bit later. But the width and the speed of the oscillation are the 2 factors that govern your vibrato. And you must be aware of those because, you know, there are a lot of great players that have a wonderful sound in all areas, but they might have a vibrato that's not matching the tune. And then there are other great players that maybe they don't have a whole lot of technique as far as playing fast, but they have a wonderful singing lyrical vibrato. I tell people, make vibrato one of your top priorities from today right on, because that's how you're going to express one note with great grace and flair. If we play this A note, now I'm on the 1st string, so we have a unique situation. We only have one choice. That would be to do vibrato by pushing the 1st string toward the 2nd string. Now, I said it's a controlled bend and release. What you should do is perhaps practice against a backing track where you're doing a slur, a hammer pull of the A and the B flat notes in a steady 8th note rhythm. Then play against that track, making sure that you're nailing the B flat, but this is very important, making sure you release it all the way back to the A. Now I'm going to talk about guitars a little bit. Sometimes some guitars have the string too close to the edge of the fret. The way the fret is dressed on the end, if it swoops in too much, you can fall off the neck. So you have to be very careful on the 1st string. Now I would love to have a lot of different camera angles here because you could see exactly what I'm talking about. When I teach privately, I show people from different angles and talk about angles of the fingers and whatnot. But where you press down, I'm going to go back to just basic left-hand technique. Now I've studied classical guitar, jazz, rock, all styles, and the right place for your hand at any given time is whatever's appropriate for what you're playing at that moment. Don't dogmatically think your hand should be in one position. I had a student one time that had studied classical and his passion was to be a blues player. But he had it so locked in, keeping his thumb in the back like this, that he had major struggles and he never got off the ground with his blues playing. So, where your thumb goes? Well, first thing we're going to talk about, a legitimate hand position, I mean a classical hand position. You've probably seen it in books. They used to write dogmatically, always keep your thumb in the back. Well, don't buy into any of that. If your hands parallel, your knuckles are parallel to the edge of the fingerboard, that's very efficient for classical passages and straight line jazz runs where you're going to use all 4 fingers. But for what we want, we need a fulcrum. Now, if you don't know what a fulcrum is, it's like on a seesaw. Anytime you have a lever, it's that point of contact. The underside of your index finger knuckle will be your fulcrum. You want to keep that against the back of the neck, actually toward the bottom part here. Your thumb's going to hang around the top. So your general hand position is you just let your hand hang from the top. Notice how my forearm is relaxed, and you can't really see all that too well because the neck's obscuring that. But I'm not doing this. See how I stuck my elbow out? Make sure you let your arm just hang naturally along your side. And sit up pretty straight. Don't slouch over the guitar. You don't want to keep your chiropractor making a fortune. Your hand's just hanging. Now, if you come in with your finger, where are you going to press down the tip of your finger? You know, you might say, this guy's just going over the top as far as details, but it makes a difference on your sound and your efficiency. Leverage is a big part of playing blues guitar. You can do it an easy way, or you can make it hard for yourself. Where you press down the tip of your finger, That's important. Keep your fingernails very short because you're actually going to come in not on the tip of your finger. You're going to come in on the corner. Now, if you're not used to this, you're going to have some discomfort because you probably don't have a callus there. And if your nail's too long, it's going to dig in. You're going to have a little problem right there on the cuticle. So notice how your finger comes in on the corner. Now, where should your fulcrum be? Remember, the fulcrum is this index finger knuckle. If you come way back like this, you suddenly put a bend in your wrist. Look down at your wrist from your vantage point, and if your wrist got broken, they had to put a steel rod in it, you'd tell them, keep it straight when you put that rod in so I can still do vibrato. With all that locked up, you do this. Your fingers, the second, third, and fourth finger, should form a little wing up against the DIP joint of the first finger. Now keep these all curled, and then when you play the note, your bicep's going to do the work. Don't do the work with your fingers. Keep a relatively good grip around the neck, nothing over the top, but then use your hand to simply push the string into the fret, and don't use any more force than you need. And then use your bicep to rotate. So do you see it's truly a controlled bend and release. Now if you practice doing it really slow, and put a little overdrive on, so and work on your sustain. And keep the note ringing. That's how you'll do vibrato with your first finger on the first string. And then you want to practice that in different places. Now you're going to also have to incline your finger at different angles because as you go up the neck, the action gets higher, right? So you may run into some real noise problems. Now I'm going to talk about right hand dampening a lot later on. If you notice now, you'll see I'm dampening, but I'm not even going to address that right now. That's how you do vibrato on the first string with your index finger. If you're on your second finger, reinforce it with your first, or use a dampening bar where you're deadening the second and third strings. Again, it's a tight little unit. You're relaxed, and your hand's working as a unit. You get all that solid sound, more heart and soul in the note, because things aren't loose. If you're on your third finger, reinforce it with your second finger and dampen with your first finger. Now you're going to learn to dampen with both hands because you can get a lot of nasty noise when you're playing. If you learn how to dampen, don't think it's going to make you sterile. You can still get trashy, but you have control that way. Now we're not going to use the fourth finger very much. It's shorter than all the rest, and I'm going to teach a traditional blues guitar approach. Now when you get into fusion and a lot of modern playing, you might use your little finger for vibrato and things like that. But for now, we're going to primarily stay with your first, second, and third fingers. In the next segment, I'm going to talk about vibrato on the other strings, and we'll talk about how to approach practicing vibrato.